Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now then, interesting times. Irish team very much settled in New Zealand at this stage. The first test is on Saturday. In the meantime, Wednesday morning, the Maori All Blacks, and this fairly relentless 3.5 weeks gets underway. 5 big matches, and already this week has taken a few twists and turns. Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent here in studio. Hello.
Hey Joe, how you doing?
I'm very well. So there is a COVID outbreak in the New Zealand setup. They are without their head coach Ian Foster. They are without their forwards coach John Plumtree. They are without their defence specialist Scott McLeod. They are without David Havili and Jack Goodhue. And so into the breach. Welcome back.
Hello darkness, my old friend. The smiling assassin Joe Schmidt is back, and he's leading the All Blacks this week. And Ireland have had, it was one of those nights. I would normally be down in New Zealand covering these things. I'm back at home this year. I was watching the Sunday game last night where the email came through from the All Blacks, and I think most Irish people probably would have missed it because they were watching the fallout of Armagh and Galway, such as the summer tour life. And by the time I woke up, Ireland had ruled Mac Hansen has COVID. Rob Herring and Ian Henderson have gone for scans, and all this stuff had happened at the All Blacks as well. The Maoris named their team. It was like, God, this is going to be fun. You're going to wake up every morning and things are going to be happening. But the big overriding news line is that Joe Schmidt is running the show for the All Blacks this week. I presume Ian Foster's picking the team remotely and dialing into meetings from afar, the head coach. But there is a familiar, when Andy Farrell looks across at the All Blacks coaching box on Saturday, there will be a familiar face smiling back at him, and a man who knows everything there is to know about Irish rugby. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Schmidt has watched every minute of every game the Irish players have played since he's left. I think he knows he would have retained that interest since he's left, and I think was probably, even though it was an unspoken thing, was probably involved in the preparations for this anyway. But this gives him a much more central role and makes life so much more interesting now as we build up to this first test. And we don't know if he'll be involved centrally for the second and third when Foster returns, but if things go well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why not? We're going to stay around for a couple of weeks, Joe. We'll put you up in the hotel and get your insights. I think it's brilliant. It's just adds another layer to what was already something I was looking forward to.
I feel like he's gone to his archive and opened the folder marked my most special favourite plays and set piece moves, and said, I'm going to dust you off and unleash hell here. And
absolutely, and also is, I'm sure the New Zealand media chief was given a list of news websites and journalists to add to his portfolio this week, and get the full reports. I'm sure suddenly, like, if he wasn't doing it already, if you think about it, Mac Hansen's out this week. It's going to be Keith Earls or Jordan Larmour on the right wing. Joe Schmidt knows these players so intimately. He's going to be in Richie Mwanga or Jordan Barrett's ear about their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Like he gave Jordan Larmour his debut. He gave Keith Earls most of his best days. He knows exactly. He would have prepared them in such a different way. To try and hide those weaknesses in the past. He knows everything there is to know about these Irish players. It's an incredible. It's not just because he coached them. He's also that mind that we all know about, and he has the best player. Not necessarily best players anymore, but it's like some of the most talented athletes in the world to work with.
Yeah.
If you're neutral, it would be very exciting. If you're an Irish player, it's a bit daunting, a little bit.
Just to chart Schmidt post 2019. So he retired from coaching post 2019.
Finished coaching was the term.
Finished. Okay.
Yeah, there was never.
It's like a boxer who retires 10 times in their career. It was never going to stay away from coaching.
It was a very interesting worded statement that they released the day after he was named Coach of the Year at the end of that glorious 2018. He said he was going to finish coaching. It never was clear what it meant, and he was asked to clarify a few times, and he always left the door that little bit ajar.
Okay.
It wasn't a retirement. It wasn't leaving the Irish job. He was going to finish coaching. So he hasn't held a de facto coaching role since. He's been more of a consultant type figure, even though apparently he's been taking sessions in the Auckland Blues. But he's, true to his kind of the way he kind of operates, he hasn't actually coached in the kind of truest sense of it. He's kind of found a parameter that he can work in that didn't betray what he said that day.
These semantics. If someone said to you,
it's just bringing it all back.
I'm finishing up work, you'd assume they're retiring.
Well, it's like if I said I'm finished journalism and then signed for the Irish Times the following week, it's similar to doing that. You'd expect me to go and get a job in PR. If I said I was finished journalism, but he's found he helped out at Claremont. Then he went into the World Rugby, and he became the director of rugby and World Rugby. And I think
that was a big job there in World Rugby, wasn't it?
It was, but I think Joe Schmidt always liked the tracksuit element of coaching, being on the pitch, and I think the politics of that job probably wore him down a bit. Plus, during COVID, he was staying in Dublin, and then we're based here, and he moved back to Auckland during COVID and decided to stay, as far as I'm aware. And that's a combination of those two factors saw him choose to leave World Rugby at that point, and he was then co-opted onto the Auckland Blues coaching ticket as I couldn't tell you what the term, you maybe have it there. He's an advisor. It's an advisory role to Liam MacDonald. Suddenly they were brilliant. Now they have very good players. They've always had very good players, but they got to the final of Super Rugby this year, played unbelievable rugby along the way. You know, Bowden Barrett was, apparently, bending at the knee to kind of learn everything he could get from him. He's the starting out half for the Blues. Now they ultimately were undone in the final by the Crusaders, who absolutely obliterated them in the final, took apart every strength of their game, a little bit like maybe the World Cup quarter final when things went the ground. But he had a very positive influence there, and now after this tour, he's supposed to be taking over from Grant Fox as what they call an independent selector. So he is kind of a voice to help Ian Foster in the selection room, where he's not actually in a kind of a player. It's not a role we have in Irish rugby, but he's a kind of not a player facing influence, but he is part of the selection meetings. But I think if you know Joe Schmidt, and you know, I think most Irish people have a good idea of how he operates, it wouldn't be long before he would be getting involved. And Foster apparently wants him to be involved because he respects him so much, and he's trying to fight for his job. And Schmidt isn't the threat; it's Scott Robertson who's the threat. He's the Crusaders coach, and that's the political background for this in New Zealand. The New Zealand fans are not sold on this coaching ticket. They want another guy. So Foster's kind of fighting for his life, and Schmidt may be the white knight.
Because I was reading with the Blues, for instance, when he arrived, it was, as you said, more in a consultancy type role. But I was reading, I haven't seen this, but I was reading pretty quickly, he was in his tracksuit taking the warm-ups pre-game, in much the same way he took the warm-ups for Ireland. That suggests very hands-on.
And if you have Joe Schmidt as part of your organisation, you get him on the pitch, because he is, one of the best coaches in the game, if not in the history of the game. I know things went sour with Ireland, but the things he achieved here, both here and at Leinster and at Claremont, and the respect that he has across the board, he's a phenomenal coach. So if you have him in the Auckland Blues, and you have him as your kind of strategist, I mean, he'd probably do a good job there as well, because he is a very intelligent man, but you really want him imparting that detail to him. So that's how we understand it. But then when it went to the coaching box, it was Liam MacDonald and his coaching team. But it would be a surprise if Joe wasn't wired in somewhere and having some influence, because he's far more experienced than those people, and has they would respect him to that. Like they will become better coaches because they've worked with Joe. So people are willing to bring him on board in that regard. And he doesn't want that front face. He doesn't want to do the media. He doesn't want that part of it. It's a bit like Stuart Lancaster at Leinster. I think it probably suits him to be in that kind of Kaiser Soze style role, where he's he gets in and out without having to do any of the stuff he hated doing it when he was the Ireland coach.
Interesting. And the upturn in the Blues' fortunes coincided in a fairly concrete way with his arrival.
Yeah, they were getting better. They have a very good roster of players. They've some of the best athletes, and like Auckland, the players that are produced in the a little bit like the Leinster academy. Like Auckland is the biggest population in New Zealand, and when you tap into that, you'll get great players. They signed Bowden Barrett, and they have an incredible forward pack. And I didn't see an awful lot of Super Rugby this year. I had watched them in previous years, and they were exciting to watch, but there was always a soft underbelly, and that actually got exposed in the final. But they were more solid. Their winning return was much better, and they played exceptional rugby at times. So that's the Schmidt effect.
So Schmidt due anyway, once the Irish tour was over, to come on board officially as independent selector and analyst, I saw as well. Again, these are suitably vague terms. So I think his first match as part of the setup was going to be South Africa in the Super Rugby Championship. But you said there you suspect he was feeding in information already in advance of this tour. Yeah, well, he's part of the system now. So once you're in the New Zealand system, it's a very aligned system, and Ian Foster has his number, and it would be remiss of him not. I mean, Rúaidhrí O'Connor was in with Ireland this week, so not in a tactical sense, but almost in a kind of a cultural sense, to try and prepare them for playing the Maori. So everyone's talking to everyone. But if he's on the New Zealand rugby payroll and he's joining the team after this, he probably feels. I mean, he's an Irish citizen. He's worked with these Irish players. He probably felt like it was a nice way to avoid being the focus in this couple of weeks. It's come about a different way anyway. He was on the breakdown that New Zealand
show, or maybe it was a different show. I listened to a podcast a while ago, and he was saying, I'm too busy, I'm hosting a lot of Irish fans who are coming over, they're staying in my house, I have to entertain them, I wouldn't be able to get involved. Very much the late side of Joe, where he was kind of that happy-go-lucky. But you know that he's a proud New Zealander. He's part of the system now, and his job is to help them get better.
Yes.
And he will be giving them. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would suspect, and the word is that he has. It's kind of an open secret that he has been to some degree involved.
Yeah. A word on Foster and his security of tenure. So beaten by France and Ireland in November, and beaten by South Africa as well last year. 3 defeats in a calendar year. That does not happen to New Zealand very often. Is he a shoo-in to make it to the World Cup as coach? They're not afraid to make a late turn in the road.
They have a model, and their model is to be a lot of continuity and a lot of cohesion, and that's the model that rugby has followed for an awful long time. And then Rassie Erasmus just ripped it up. He took over 18 months out and won the World Cup. So suddenly there's an example there of someone who has a resource heavy rugby nation, loads of really good players, and who can whip them into shape in 18 months and go and win the World Cup. New Zealand, the pool of players is not as strong now as it was under Steve Hansen. Steve Hansen got out at a pretty good time. Still very, very good. And there is an outstanding candidate who Foster beat to the job in Scott Robertson, who's the former All Black who coaches the Crusaders. People might have seen him breakdancing after the final. It's his thing that he does every year. He worked with Ron O'Gara. He's talked in the studio about how excellent he is as a coach. I've met him. He's a really impressive figure.
Charismatic figure.
Very popular.
Yeah.
Whereas Foster, although quite humorous and stuff, is quite... will be seen as being more dour continuity candidate, a bit like Farrell. He took over after the World Cup. He's been part of the All Blacks for a long time. He's bit institutional. He's an NZRU man. Scott Robertson's more the kind of rogue outsider in people's eyes. He's winning. They play really good rugby. They've won another title. I think 6 in a row he's won with the Crusaders. They're the best. I mean, with people talking about Leinster being the best, like the Crusaders are the best in the world at what they do. So there is if the Ireland tour goes badly and then the Rugby Championship goes badly, there is an argument to be made that Foster will be removed and Robertson will come in. New Zealand
as opposed to Schmidt.
Yeah, I think Schmidt wouldn't have the kudos of Robertson. Schmidt, the NZRU might prefer to move Schmidt in. Whether Joe would want to do that or not, I don't know. It looks like he's now part of Foster's thinking for the World Cup. And again, it probably suits Joe to have that advisory analyst role where he's on the pitch, he's in the coaching box, but he's not in front of the cameras, he's not doing the media stuff. He'll do it every so often at his own discretion, but he's not the guy all the time.
I wonder about the ego of that. I mean, would Joe Schmidt not want to be the guy? Head coach in New Zealand, is that not the ultimate dream job?
See, I don't know if I always wondered if Joe, because he was so he used up so much energy wondering, not being able to control the outside factors about what people were saying about his team. If he was the head coach and people in New Zealand Herald, who were New Zealand media, for all of its reputation, is quite favourable towards the team, and they keep them on side very well, and they kind of go after the touring side. We might see it in the next couple of weeks. They'll go after Ireland if things are going badly. But still, it's a lot of focus. Like Steve Hansen talked about, like paparazzi turning up in their back garden. Joe's a very private person. He kept the media at a distance when he was the coach. He was very good at it. Like he's very able to do it. We've seen he's charming when he wants to be, and he's ruthless at the same time. But I always wondered if this was a better. Like he would get the kudos within the game from the people he respects. Now he wouldn't get the love of the he's always talked about the white van man who'd roll out his window and say thank you Joe as he walked around, and how that made him feel so special. Like he probably wouldn't get that. But I don't know in your home country if he wants that. It's such a high profile job. Ireland, for all of we've come up in the world and as a rugby nation, it's still the 4th sport. He was a massive figure, but he could still probably go about his business a bit more. I think in Auckland it's more difficult. Hard to know. Maybe I'm underselling that ego side of things, but I think it works for him. I don't know. He's ruthless. He's a top man. Maybe when he gets his handle on things and he kind of goes, well, this isn't working, and then Enzo or you ask him what's happening, he goes, well, I think I could do a better job. Maybe that plays out that way. I'm not sure at this stage, but he's he's a storyline. Maybe he didn't want to be a storyline before that, but he is the big storyline going into this week, certainly in this part of the world.
He sure is. So it remains to be seen if Foster will be well enough to be in the coach's box Saturday.
Yeah, we just depends on when he tests positive. We were back in Lions tour, COVID stuff. It feels weird. Like, to be honest, at this stage, most Irish teams, if someone had COVID, they just didn't. They said he was ill, or we kind of stopped. It wasn't bringing down games since the European stuff, and they might say he had COVID and he was gone. It kind of became just a thing. Whereas now it feels like it's threatening the whole tour again.
Well, 3 players with it. I mean, if it's spreading, and we don't have much wiggle room with this tour.
No.
Eden Park first up.
Yeah.
I only heard that the other day. Because Eden Park is traditionally the last stop for a touring party like this, and they are famously unbeaten there since '94.
Yes. Yeah. And they played the Lions there twice in 17 because they wanted to win it so much. They brought. It's also the biggest stadium they have.
This is the most complimentary thing they have ever done towards Irish rugby. This is incredible.
And they sold it out as well, which is another massive compliment, because you always wondered. 2012, I'd say it was it had to be quite a marketing push to get the bums on seats, because Ireland didn't have the respect. Whereas now, Ireland have beaten 3 times in the last 5 games, and they are more recognised. The players are more familiar to the New Zealand public because they have their attention. It's undeniable that is the case, but it also makes it sweeter to beat them. So,
and is this is to offset the general thinking, and we're maybe kind of feeling backwards for old generalisations, but the general feeling, well, Eden Park last, most difficult to beat, and they're at their most vulnerable in the first test. Yeah. So let's offset that by going to Eden Park first. That's the reading of it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the Eden Park factor, I think, can be overplayed. Lions drew there in 2017. They won the World Cup final there, but France should have won that day. It wasn't Eden Park got them over the line. It was the referee. I don't think the venue. Home advantage matters more than that actual venue. I know we can build up the mystique, and that fact is a fact, and it's undeniable. They do move an awful lot of their games around. They don't lose at home very often either way. This is whether they do it in Eden Park or in one of the other 2 venues, it's going to be an outstanding achievement to pull it off.
Yeah.
But it is. You're right. It does show that maybe they want to front load the third series. They want to get ahead. They see this as a series. It's not a set of individual tests that they're going to win, which they would normally they'll get overlooked. They now see it as a legitimate test series where there is a risk that Ireland can win, and they want to stay in there. I mean, one of the other things they have, the Super Rugby final was only two weeks ago, so they have a very short lead in. So actually basing the team in Auckland, getting them all together probably helps as well in their traditional way. So there's a few things at play. But then they're weakened by the fact that potentially their starting centres are out. Certainly one of those 2 would have played. Havili, I think, came off the bench in Dublin in 2021, and Goodhue was injured, but he's their main man in midfield. So that means they have much less experience in that area, a very pivotal area where Ireland are really, really strong. So there are, and we just don't know. We may wake up tomorrow and more players are gone. This
is the thing. And so, will injuries and then COVID notwithstanding, which are both very unpredictable across the next 3.5 weeks, would you have a sense of which test is most winnable from an Irish perspective?
Well, Ireland should be targeting winning the series. It's not,
should be winning the series.
Should be targeting winning the series. Well,
if they win one, is that not a great success on New Zealand soil? Is that not another?
Depends which one you win. I think if you win the first one and then you lose the series, it's history. But I was in South Africa in 2016 when they won the first one and they realised South Africa were vulnerable and they couldn't get over the line. They should have won that series, and they were making a documentary. It was a sponsored documentary, and basically the documentary didn't mention, it was basically the line at the end that Ireland went on to lose the second. It was all about the first game, whereas I actually contributed to the footage for the third test. They'd done the whole documentary for the whole thing, but they just decided, no, we're just going to focus on the win. They
cut out your starting role hammering the team.
Absolutely, yeah. No, but I thought that team was actually was really under strength in comparison to this team. It was much less strong. Johnny Sexton wasn't there, loads of starters missing. My point is that once you get over there, it's all framed by the context of what happens over there. If you win the first test, then you should go on to win the series. Yes, when you look back on the cold light of day, one win in New Zealand, one test win and beating the Maoris twice is a decent return in a kind of a cold hard facts on a ledger, yes. But really, you're going over there to win. This is a team Ireland have beaten 3 times in the last 5 years. They're at a low ebb. Their high ebbs are pretty high and they haven't come that far. Ireland are coming off the back of a very, a reasonably successful season. They've got nearly everyone on deck, and New Zealand suddenly have a crisis in the ranks. There is massive upheaval. I mean, why? The odds are they should be winning one.
Yeah, I know.
They should be picking off one, and
one for me is a success.
At what point do we stop being plucky underdogs? At what point? I know this is the last. This in the quarterfinal or the last piece of history that Irish rugby have to make. But they if they've anything about them, if they want to, win a World Cup, which they say they do, they can't be going over there thinking 1 out of 3 is good enough.
Okay. Because I was going to put it to you, if you take England 03, South Africa in 19, and then Australia in both 91 and 99, they managed to win once in New Zealand the season prior, very famously.
Yeah.
And once was just fine. Once
England
didn't.
only played once, though.
Fair point.
Like, series has only came back recently, and they're brilliant. I love them, and they're gone again after this, and I really think they're missed. So they take on a dynamic. Like, a load of these Irish players were over there in 17 with the Lions, and like, New Zealand were very human on that tour. Now, they needed a red card to win. A very dodgy decision at the end of the third test to come up, to draw that game, because they should have lost it really. But Ireland have more cohesion than the Lions. They might not have the same level of great players across the board, but they have cohesion. Like, I'm not being bullish about it. Like, I do think there's massive problems in the Irish ranks. Like, I think the Tyke Furlong's injury is a massive concern to me. The depth beneath him is an issue. Same at loosehead prop. Ronan Kelleher and now Rob Herring. That's big. That's leaving a lot of weight on Dan Sheehan's shoulder. That's your front row. And what was the difference last November? It was Ireland's tight five. Ian Henderson, I think, is a big underrated component of that tight five. When he's fit, he's really important to this team. James Ryan's form's not great. That's your tight five undermined. That's a big problem. So I'm not being ridiculously bullish. I do think there are things that Ireland have to overcome to get there, and it could go horribly wrong. There is one of those countries where if things start to go wrong, it could go horribly wrong. And the Maoris could soften them up this week. They could lose one more due to COVID. And they're at the end of a long season, and the weather might come in down in Dunedin, and suddenly things are looking a lot less appealing. So it's not. I'm not saying they're going to do it. I just think that's what they should be aiming towards, because there are things they need to overcome.
So Théann at hooker, obviously this week in particular, given that they started without Ronan Kelleher, and then Rob Herring is having a scan. Niall Scannell arrives tomorrow. So for the Maori game on Wednesday, they have two fit hookers. Dave Heffernan presumably now will start. At the time of us recording, we don't have the team, and Dan Sheehan will get as few minutes as possible, potentially, as in do not get injured for the weekend.
You'd think they wouldn't put Scannell on the bench if he's only just landed, but I think David Wallace did it for the Lions at one stage, and they might just go, right, Dave Heffernan, you're going 80 here, that's
Sheehan and
kind
Cottonwall.
I mean, if they lose Sheehan, they're in real trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, and Sheehan, like Rob Herring and Ronan Kelleher, are their two best scrummaging hookers, and that's where my big fear about this Irish team is at the moment. And New Zealand don't have the scrum to really undermine them in the way that South Africa, France or England do, but they do have, they have picked their scrummaging props rather than they've picked Tuanafaki, who's going to France next year. Like, he'd normally be bombed out, but they've picked him in the squad. He's probably going to start at loosehead. Like, he's not a great player, but he's a good scrummager, so they're going to go after him there. Greg Feeks, the former Irish scrum coach, he's still in camp, and he knows everything there is to know about these players as well, so there's a lot of intel there, so they may go after them in that area. Like, hooker's a real area of concern. Like, front row depth is an issue in Irish rugby at the moment. It's not really going to be fixed between now and the World Cup. They've high hopes for Tom O'Toole on the tight head side, but if anything happens to Furlong, they're left to Finlay Bealham and Tom O'Toole, who really don't have a huge amount of experience at this level, so that's a big risk. So that is the area I think where Ireland could come a cropper. But you've got your Joe McCarthy's in the second row, might come good. You've got Ryan Baird, who could really cut loose on a tour like this. You've got players who could step up, but it's a bit more of an unknown than, say, a fully fit Porter Furlong outside Kelleher, with Sheehan coming off the bench with a real impact. Then you've got Henderson and Ryan with Tyke Byrne coming on. Fit Tyke Byrne, that's a tight five. That can cope with the All Blacks and could dominate. Whereas now that strength is undermined. They might have to find a different way.
To Wednesday then, 8:05 Irish time in Hamilton, the Maori All Blacks game. I see TJ Perinara's on the bench. He was a surprise omission from the main squad. Brad Weber, who has 17 New Zealand caps, starts at 9. 10 debutants. It's been talked about as a mix of experience and the rising stars of Super Rugby. We don't have the Irish team yet, so it's difficult maybe to answer this with complete knowledge or certainty. But what are you expecting from these Maori games? I mean, these are going to be close-run things, no?
It's very hard to know what the Maori beat Ireland in 2010, and that was a very strong Irish team because it was one of the three tests on tour. As such, it wasn't actually a test game, but they played us New Zealand, then the Maori, then Australia Saturday. This is a different Irish team. It's going to be, I would think, 4 or 5. They're not going to get debuts, but uncapped players: Joe McCarthy, James Hume, pretty much I think all the uncapped players who are not going to be probably involved on Saturday. Maybe 1 or 2 on the bench. Harry Byrne could start at 10. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns there with that team, and you're coming up against a team like the Maori were really disappointing on the Lions tour in 2017. Lions it was the Lions test team, but they fairly comfortably dealt with them. They're hit and miss. It depends on kind of what group they can pull together. But I mean, some of the debutants that you've mentioned, they're full All Blacks. They're not. They might be debutants for the Maoris, but they've won 1 or 2 caps for the All Blacks. Cullen Gray, still is a very good player. Tyrell Lomax, one of the props. I mean, he could end up in the All Black picture by the end of this window. Partner and Weber, they would probably be in the top 2 in any other country in the world, but it's an area of strength for the All Blacks. So it's a bit unknown because both teams are scratch sides. They've never played together. It's always a risk in international rugby putting unproven centres together who've never played together. Bundy Aki probably will play because he hasn't played. Like the Connacht lads haven't played in months and months. In 5-6 weeks, Keane Prendergast will probably play because he hasn't. If these guys are going to contribute, they need to have a game under their belt. So Ireland need to. Wales went down in 2018 and they played the Chiefs midweek and they got absolutely hosed, and it was really damaging to them. They lost the series 3-0. They were better in the test series than they were in the midweek game, and it was damaging to Wales. They ended up making the World Cup semi-final the whole year, but for the tour point of view, it was quite a bad loss. Ireland should have more depth than Wales did at that point, and the team players will be fresh. But it's kind of 2 scratch sides. It could be scrappy, but it'll be. I think the Maori will be sent out with a mission to soften them up and kind of send out a bit of a message that this is not going to be an easy tour whatsoever. Yeah,
we think so. I saw Craig Casey was saying, and well, first of all, he made everybody feel a bit old by saying that he remembered vividly watching 10 years ago, 2012, when he was in 6th class. To which Johnny Sexton, I'm sure, went, "Would you shut your mouth?"
Yeah,
make me feel too old.
4 or 5 of the Irish players played in it.
Yeah, 5 were there. Yeah,
and a lot of the All Blacks, like the All Black senior core, nearly all got their debuts on that tour.
He added, though, when you're walking down the street, everyone's stopping you, wishing you well, and saying, "We're glad that you're here for the test. You see how rugby mad the country is. It's class." There was going to be hostility on the streets, like throwing vegetables at him as he walked down the street.
I think a lot of that is kind of a legacy of older tours. I found it very friendly in 17. Like on match day, they're quite vociferous. Eden Park's actually not a particularly nice atmosphere. They're quite drunk, and like a lot of rugby stadiums these days, it's quite drunk and a bit abusive. Stephen Jones was sitting quite close to me, so that's probably what it was. They don't like him at all. The Sunday Times journalists, but during the week they just want to chat rugby with you, And I think if they beat you, certainly in the old days, if they beat you, they tell you all about it. And like if O'Driscoll was spotted walking down the street, they'd make a beeline to tell him he was crap on Saturday. That's probably where it comes from. But I think that they're a lot more used to tourists now, and they quite like having. I think they're probably quite happy to have any Irish people they can get over there because they've been closed off from the world for so long. So, it's just, I think this series will take on a life of its own, and maybe it gets more hostile after the first test when there's a red card or a suspension or a bad tackle, and the storylines get whipped up, and you're in that bubble. The first week is quite nice, but maybe they're killing them with kindness at the moment, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, hopefully it's a fun few weeks ahead. It's great to have it. So Rugby on Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. Rúaidhrí O'Connor of the Irish Independent. Thanks for coming in.
Cheers, Joe.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.